Tonight, we are unpacking what it means to be a first, second, or third generation Latinx person living in the US.
My dad immigrated from Mexico when he was very young. He seemed kind of ashamed of his culture. My dad never spoke Spanish in the house. I only heard Spanish when I'd go over to my grandma's house. My dad was very firm about trying to be as American as possible. I really tried in college to get more connected to it. I joined like a multicultural sorority. I do have to say it's been great having such a supportive family, whereas like my dad is like, he's always just been like a truck driver, and for him to be like, yeah, that's cool if you want to move to New York and be a musical theater person. Being the first in my family to go to college, we almost speak totally different languages in that sense. I try to explain theater to him and he's like, I don't get it.
My grandparents on my father's side fled Cuba in 1947 from after the Batista Revolution. They escaped an authoritarian dictator, essentially. There was this strong need to assimilate into American culture, and our family last name is Castro. It was quite difficult to sort of like escape that. I'm
second generation. My mom is Bolivian, my dad's Ecuadorian. I remember getting into theater, explaining this more importantly to my dad. Like, oh, that's great. I'm glad that you're having fun, but let's get a little bit more focused. I remember being a little kid, I used to speak Spanish, and that was my first language. And then going into kindergarten, having to learn English. My mom would literally tell us, speak in English.
My abuelita came over from Jimenez, Mexico. I didn't learn Spanish until actually high school. I didn't want to like get out of my comfort zone when I was a kid and learn it. I actually grew up with like a lot of other Latinx people around me. Like my neighbors, we moved away from like that neighborhood. It was a lot less like diverse for me. So that's when I think I started to like gear towards those like self-expression instincts. I need to like become like a true Mexican. My name like kind of tells you about my dad's side of the family, but it doesn't tell you that I'm half Mexican. If I want to tell people about it, then I can, but it's like not on the page right there. I went on a heritage trip in 2019 with my abuelita to her hometown. Very different from like resort Mexico, which I had been to before.
My parents immigrated to the US from Colombia. They raised us speaking Spanish. They took us to Colombia. They made sure to incorporate the food, the music. But then I see other parts where they did have that aspect of like trying to assimilate. I'm not fully like American enough, and like I'm not fully Colombian enough. In the US, it is a position of privilege to be able to express your culture and not fear. And I grew up in Miami, where Latinx cultures is really normalized. We do have a German last name and we are white. So I can't really separate culture from like race, from class, trying to understand like what it means to express yourself in the US in a way that's truly yours. In my Colombian extended family, I'm like, do I need to morph into a different person?
That is something that so many Latinx people can relate to, is like, I'm not just one thing. Moving to New York, whenever people found out I was Latina, oh my God, that's so like exotic. And I remember feeling that way. This is what makes me interesting, especially in the entertainment industry. I've often felt like if I want to be a proud Latina, then I have to go the Sofia Vergara route. I can't speak so American. Whether you speak Spanish or not, does that make you more or less? We as a group are always trying to define who we are. We're always trying to come up with the parameters and the rules in order to like push back on the expectations. How much can we like define ourselves within the system if the system still exists?
According to Pew, I'm an interloper here. Third generation is what I would call myself on my father's side. We're Puerto Rican on that side. I kind of don't agree with lumping Puerto Rican in with like the same description of first, second, and third generation in regards to American mainland culture. There's still the same issues of the amount of cost associated, like the barriers of entry, not to mention the othering. On my mother's side, I'm second generation. I'm half Puerto Rican, half Filipino. And so I don't speak Spanish. My family spoke English in the house, that's it. I don't even know that there was necessarily so much focus on assimilation. It's just what the options were. Grew up in a very white town. I'm constantly thinking about like what it is to be Asian American and what it is to be Latina American, and I'm constantly trying to like put those two things together. The Black and Latina community are constantly dealing with higher incarceration rates and what that means for single mothers. And the fact that the incarceration rates are not as high in the Asian community. And so does that mean that that's another part of just being the race that seems to quote unquote assimilate more easily?
We're juggling so many identities. I'm second generation. I'm Puerto Rican Dominican. My father came from the island. He never really wanted to assimilate at all, whereas my mother really wanted us to assimilate. I mean, I grew up with my dad calling me white because I really wanted so badly to assimilate with American culture. I never learned Spanish, never wanted to. I was very resistant to it. The education system sort of says like, hey, if you want to be successful, you got to assimilate to American history, to English. My grandfather he always used to say he was an architect in PR. And when he came here, he couldn't do anything really special because he didn't have American education. They wouldn't give him that chance. So that was something that was really instilled in me. You got to do really good in school, otherwise you're screwed. While you're trying to stay with your culture, this American dream is trying to take us away at the same time.
I grew up deep in the Midwest with my very, very Cuban mom. Being American is not actually about like what your skin looks like. It's about how you handle your anger. And in the Midwest, you don't deal with your anger. I have these memories of like going out to get like Christmas tree ornaments with my mother. And there's like a small discrepancy and she's flying off the handle. And so I feel like what I learned about like how to be the like good second generation that I am was like fluency and mediation. This translation of like, okay, mom, I'm hearing that you feel like the tax is too high and you think it might be racist. Hello, white person. It sounds like you might have made a mistake. That's fine. Let's translate this. With my peers at school, who I would say, my name is Juliana, that automatically put me in this category of non-American, even though I was fluent in, you know, I got my emotions, I'm playing them close to the vest, and I'm not gonna let you see how, like, what I'm really thinking, because I know that I have to like perform in order to like be part of this group. The way I learned to be Cuban was listening to stories at a table. And so the first like relationship I had outside of shame, which is like, oh my God, my mom is so other, was I had to imagine what the island was like. 2018 was the first time I went. I got there and they were like, you're Americana. You do not fit in either place. Some part of why we're artists is that we're like sort of constantly doing this synthesizing, trying to make the spaces where these multiplicities can exist.
There's this idea that, oh, if you're raising them speaking Spanish, then like they won't be as good at English.
I grew up in South Florida. The Cuban community down here is pretty right-wing, anti-big government, and they have gone to the extreme with it. This concept of identity has affected me not just culturally, but politically and economically as well. And when I went to New York and I met Cubans who maybe didn't share that sentiment, and the more I sort of learned about economics and politics, and while of course there have been massive human rights transgressions and like terrible things that have occurred, I actually don't fear that sort of thing. Like, I voted for Bernie Sanders. Don't tell my Cuban family.
I still felt a little different from my friends who were just, you know, their families have been in the US for generations, just with how I express myself. My family is very expressive and emotional, and anger is for sure like a powerful, you know, tool in making a point. If you compare the US to other countries, like, yeah, there are more opportunities, but there are like these like extensions of colonization still going on. Yeah, there are roadblocks. My parents did go through a lot, but did they go through as much as somebody like who has a darker skin tone or who crossed on foot?
My being a waitress is a controversial topic. Like, I can't really talk to my aunts and uncles about that, because that's just like, don't talk about that. Talk about your producing, talk about your writing.
All of a sudden you get a phone call and you get someone who's speaking English and your parents do not understand. And here you are, maybe 7, 8, 10-year-old, whatever, talking to an adult, trying to understand the concept of what they're saying, and then trying to translate it to your parents, vice versa. That's a lot of pressure to put on a child growing up.
I feel like it's how we express love that's like so different. People on my dad's side were Black, and I feel like they more value like, you know, being like your own independent like agent. A lot of times they'll just be like, oh, why are y'all like hugging on each other so much?
Going to an art school and having them be like, great, you're Latin. Here's Christina Aguilera. Do an accent, but I'm not gonna fake something or put anything on just to make people happy or make them feel like it's what they understand my cultural background to be. Telling your stories and the stories that you relate to, and that's different across the board. That doesn't matter what country you came from. Your relation to that story is your own.
US culture does a great job of commodifying the other. Okay, you speak Spanish, you have the dark skin and the dark hair, and that's all what being Latinx is. We can like change that language and be like, no, it's so much more than that. It's like how you express emotion. It's how you were raised.
Sometimes I feel like our own communities are the most stringent gatekeepers, and I'm just like so happy to hear that there's more and more people who are not willing to participate in it.
Our identities are all over the place, and that's okay. I'd rather just grab the best of every part of the world and just make it my own.
There is never going to be like the Latino, the Latina, the Latinx person. By who we are, by the work that we do, we are actually like getting to make that umbrella bigger.
Everybody is so many things, not just culturally, ethnically, with gender, sexuality. We are like entering this like multifaceted, beautiful tapestry. This conversation is right on target for today, but I don't think that it will be in 20 years in a good way. Not that Cafecito can't go on for 20 years, but it'll have to evolve.
We are not a monolith. You can't look at me and say, oh, okay, this is what you are. This is the Latin community. We are clearly the example of those breaking the generational curses that were set, you know, for us.
Cheers.